My sister was the golden child my entire life. But when Grandpa left us $500K each, my parents demanded I give her all my money. What I did next left them speechless. I'm 28 years old. I work in finance at a pretty big firm. And honestly, I need to get this story off my chest because what happened 3 months ago with my grandfather's inheritance basically blew up my family in a way that, well, maybe should have happened years ago. The thing is, this didn't start with the inheritance. I mean, that was just the straw that broke the camel's back. This goes back as far as I can remember, since my sister Charlotte was born when I was 3, and my parents, Kevin and Angela, decided she was the son and I was, I don't know, like a plant that grows on its own without needing water. I don't remember much from before Charlotte was born, but what I do remember perfectly is my 7th birthday. It was the first time I really understood that something was wrong. My parents bought me a cake from the grocery store, one of those generic ones with the too sweet frosting, and they gave me a couple of basic gifts. Fine, whatever. I was 7 and I was happy. But 3 months later, when Charlotte turned 4, my parents threw this massive party with a bounce house, a clown, princess-themed decorations all over the house, and a 3-tier cake that probably cost more than my current car. I remember sitting in the corner watching all this and thinking, wait, why was my birthday so different? And my mom, when I asked her, said something like, oh honey, it's just that Charlotte is younger and needs more attention. Which even at 7 years old sounded weird to me because technically I was the one who was younger on my birthday, right? And that's how it was with everything. Literally everything. When I was like 10 years old, I became obsessed with bicycles. There was this amazing bike at the local store, a blue BMX with painted flames and everything, and it cost like $200. I started saving every penny I could get, mowing lawns, running errands for neighbors, saving my birthday money. It took me 6 months, but I finally had enough. I was so proud of myself, I went with my parents to the store, bought the bike with my own money, and it was one of the best days of my life. Until we got home and Charlotte saw the bike and started crying because she wanted one too. Not just any bike, but a better one than mine. And guess what? 2 days later, my parents came home with a bike for her that cost like $350. Bright pink, with a basket, and everything. She didn't have to save anything, didn't have to work for it, she just had to cry and boom, there it was. When I was like 12, I got the lead role in the school play. It was Aladdin, and I was super excited because I had practiced a ton and really worked hard at the audition. The night of the premiere, literally an hour before the show started, my mom called and told me that she and my dad weren't going to be able to come because Charlotte had a stomachache and needed someone to stay with her. I told her that my grandmother, Marilyn, could stay with Costing, Charlotte. That this was my big night, but my mom said no, that Charlotte needed them specifically. I did the play, sang all my songs, got a standing ovation, and my parents weren't there. And the worst part, the absolute worst part, is that the next day I found out Charlotte hadn't had any stomachache at all. She had made the whole thing up because she wanted attention. My parents knew it, they admitted it. But according to them, she felt lonely and needed to feel special. I was 12 years old and had just learned that real achievements mattered less than fake tantrums. The pattern continued in high school. When I was 17, I got accepted into this super competitive summer program at Harvard, like they only accepted 30 students from across the country. It was an incredible opportunity. A week of intensive business and finance workshops. The problem was, I needed my parents to drive me to the airport on a Saturday at 6 in the morning. Saturday, the same day as Charlotte's dance recital. I explained to my parents that my flight was at 8, that I needed to be at the airport at 6, that Charlotte's recital didn't start until 2 in the afternoon, that there was plenty of time to do both things. But my dad said no, that I was being selfish, that Charlotte's recital was important, and that I could find another way to get to the airport. I ended up taking an Uber that cost me like $80 from my own savings. My parents went to the recital, stayed all day, took like 1,000 photos. I went to Harvard, met incredible people, learned a ton, and when I came back and told them all about it excitedly, my dad basically said, "That's nice," and went back to watching the game on TV. College was when things really got tense. I got accepted to 3 really good universities with partial scholarships. My dad told me, well, they'd have to see how much they could help financially, that maybe they could cover part of it, but I'd have to take out student loans for the rest. Fine. I understood. Universities are expensive, but then Charlotte decided she didn't want to go to college at all, that she wanted to find herself and maybe travel a bit. And my parents, instead of telling her she needed a plan or that she had to work, told her it was perfect, that she was so brave for knowing herself so well, that not everyone needs college to be successful. The same dad who had told me that without college I'd be nobody was now celebrating that Charlotte wasn't going. And the craziest thing is they offered to pay for a 3-month trip to Europe for her to explore. 3 months in Europe, easily $10,000, while I was applying to part-time jobs to be able to pay for textbooks. I ended up going to a really good university with the scholarship I got, worked throughout my time there, graduated with honors, and got an amazing job in finance. I did well. Really well. At 25, I was making a decent salary. At 27, I bought my own house, a small one but mine. I built my life completely alone, without help from my parents, and I was proud of that. Charlotte, on the other hand, was still living with my parents. She hadn't gone to Europe in the end, had taken some retail jobs here and there, but nothing serious, and basically spent her days in my parents' basement playing video games and watching Netflix. My parents supported her completely, paid for everything, and every time I mentioned that maybe she should look for her own independence, my mom would tell me I was cruel and that not everyone has to follow my obsessive path to success. And then 3 months ago, my grandfather Lawrence died. It was sudden, a heart attack, and it was devastating because my grandfather and I were very close. He was one of the few people in my family who really saw me, who was interested in my achievements, who asked me about my work, who told me he was proud of me. Grandfather had this way of making you feel like everything you did mattered. I went to the funeral, cried like I hadn't cried in years, and honestly thought that would be the hardest thing I'd have to face that month. The will reading was 2 weeks later. The whole family was there, my parents, Charlotte, my grandmother, some aunts and uncles and cousins. The lawyer started reading, and basically my grandfather had left the house to my grandmother, Marilyn, obviously, some personal items to various family members, and then he got to the part about monetary inheritances. To each of my grandchildren, Drew and Charlotte, I leave $500,000 to be distributed equally. $500,000 each. I sat there, unable to process the information. It was an amount of money I'd never imagined having, and my grandfather had left it to Charlotte and me in equal parts. My dad was one of the executors of the will, along with my grandmother and an uncle. The meeting ended, everyone left, and I was in shock. Like, good shock, but shock nonetheless. And then that same night, literally that same night, my parents came to my house. They told me we needed to talk about the inheritance. I sat down with them thinking they were going to talk about how to invest it or something. But no. My dad told me, with complete seriousness, that he expected me to give my entire inheritance to Charlotte. All of it. The $500,000. I just stared at him like, what? Excuse me? And my mom started with her usual speech, that Charlotte had had a harder path than me, that she needed more support, that I already had a good job and a house, and was doing fine financially, that $500,000 wouldn't change my life but could change Charlotte's. I told her, wait, that didn't make sense, that Charlotte was receiving exactly the same amount as me, $500,000 too, that with that she could definitely change her life. And my dad said, well, but Charlotte needed more because she'd never developed the same skills as me, that she was more vulnerable, that I had a responsibility as the older brother to take care of her. The conversation got ugly. I told them no, that grandfather Lawrence had been very clear in his wishes, that he'd left us equal amounts because he believed in equity, that it wasn't my responsibility to sacrifice my inheritance because they'd raised Charlotte to be dependent. My mom started crying, saying I was selfish, that I'd always been like this, that I only thought about myself. My dad said he was disappointed in me, that he expected more from his son. I threw them out of my house, literally told them to leave, that this conversation was over, that my answer was no. I thought that was it, that eventually they'd accept it and we'd move on. But 2 weeks later, I got a call from my grandmother, Marilyn. She was furious, which was weird because my grandmother almost never gets angry. She told me that my dad, as executor, had announced at an executors' meeting that he planned to redistribute my inheritance to Charlotte, that he was arguing it was what's best for the family, and that my grandfather would have agreed if he'd known Charlotte's full situation. Basically, my dad was trying to steal my inheritance. My grandmother told me not to worry, that she and the other uncle executor weren't going to allow this, but that I needed to be prepared for a fight. I hired a lawyer immediately. The lawyer reviewed the will and explained that my grandfather had included something called a no contest clause, which basically said that if anyone tried to change the will or act against the explicit wishes, they lost any right to participate in the distribution. More importantly, the lawyer argued that my dad had an obvious conflict of interest as executor because he was trying to benefit his own daughter at the expense of his other child, which went directly against the testator's wishes. Things escalated really fast. My grandmother and the other uncle executor, along with my lawyer, filed a motion to remove my dad as executor. There was a hearing. My dad tried to argue that he only wanted what's best for his children, but the judge didn't buy it at all. He said that an executor has a fiduciary responsibility to follow the testator's wishes, not to impose their own opinions about what's fair. My dad was removed as executor, the no contest clause was invoked, and the will was upheld exactly as my grandfather had written it. Charlotte and I would each receive $500,000, no changes. You'd think that would be the end, but no. There was a family gathering like a month later, at my grandmother's house. Everyone was there. It was super tense. My dad saw me and basically verbally attacked me in front of everyone, saying that I'd destroyed the family, that I'd been greedy and selfish, that my grandfather would be ashamed of me. I responded, and I didn't yell, but I was firm, that my grandfather had left his wishes very clear, that I had honored those wishes, and that the only one who had tried to go against them was him. That he had tried to manipulate the will to benefit his favorite daughter like he'd done all my life, but that this time it hadn't worked. My uncle had to ask my dad to leave because he was causing a massive scene. After my dad left, my grandmother pulled me aside. She told me something I didn't know. Apparently, my parents had gone to see my grandfather like 6 months before he died and had tried to convince him to leave everything to Charlotte. They told him I was doing fine financially and didn't need an inheritance. That Charlotte was the one who really needed the support. My grandfather, according to my grandmother, listened to them and then told them no, that he believed in equity, that both grandchildren would receive exactly the same because we were both equally his grandchildren and he loved us equally. My grandmother told me this with tears in her eyes, saying that my grandfather had been very hurt by the conversation but had been firm in his decision. That broke me. Knowing that my parents had tried to do this even before my grandfather died, that they'd tried to manipulate a dying man to favor Charlotte once more. And my grandfather, this man who had seen and valued me all my life, had resisted. He had ensured that I would receive what was rightfully mine. Like a week after all this, I went to see Charlotte. I needed to talk to her directly because during all this drama she'd been silent. She hadn't supported me, but she also hadn't openly supported my parents. I went to my parents' house when I knew they wouldn't be there, and Charlotte was in the basement as always. I told her we needed to talk about all of this. I asked her why she hadn't said anything, why she'd let my parents try to steal my inheritance, why she'd never defended me. Charlotte stayed quiet for a good while, and then she told me something I didn't expect. She told me I was right, that our parents had always treated me differently, that she'd seen it all her life. She said that at first, when she was a kid, she didn't really understand it. She just knew that she got what she wanted and I didn't. But as she grew up, she started to realize how wrong everything was, how unfair it was. She told me that the problem was that by then she was so used to being the favorite that she didn't know how to change things. That she felt like if she stopped being the special girl, then she wouldn't be anything. It was an honest conversation, probably the first really honest conversation Charlotte and I had had in years. I told her I understood that the situation had been difficult for her too, in different ways, but that didn't justify staying silent while our parents tried to take away what grandfather wanted me to have. I told her she was receiving $500,000, that this was an amount of Money that could change her life if she used it well, that she could go to college, could travel, could start a business, whatever she wanted to do. Charlotte surprised me when she said I was right, that she'd been thinking a lot about all this, and that she wanted to use her inheritance to finally go to college. She said she'd let our parents convince her that she didn't need education, that she could stay with them forever, but that now she realized that wasn't a life. She said she wanted to study graphic design, that she'd always been interested in it but had never had the courage to pursue it. I told her I thought that was great, that I completely supported her in that. But then my parents found out about Charlotte's plans and, surprise, surprise, they tried to stop her. My mom told her it was a waste of money, that she was happy at home, that she didn't need to go into debt, even though Charlotte was going to pay with her inheritance, not with loans. My dad was worse. He told her that if she went to college, he'd sell the family home and they'd move to something smaller, basically threatening her emotionally. Charlotte called me crying after that conversation, saying she didn't know what to do. I told her to do whatever was best for her, not what our parents wanted. That this was her life, her money, her decision. That I would support her, no matter what. And Charlotte, to my surprise and pride, decided to go to college anyway. She enrolled in a program for the following semester, found an apartment near campus, and started making plans to move. It's been like 2 months since all this. Charlotte and I have been rebuilding our sibling relationship. We meet for coffee every 2 weeks or so. We talk about real things. She started therapy. I also resumed mine. We're working on understanding how our parents' favoritism affected us both, just in different ways. As for the inheritance, I received it a month ago. $500,000 in my account. The first thing I did was pay off all my student loans, like $80,000. Then I invested a good portion, because I work in finance so I know something about this. I donated $50,000 to mental health organizations because I firmly believe in therapy after everything I've lived through. And I'm in the process of creating a scholarship fund in my grandfather's name for first-generation students who don't have family support, because I know what it's like to try to build your life alone. My mom has tried to contact me a couple of times. Apparently she started therapy too, which is good, I guess. She sent me a long message saying she realizes she made mistakes, that she wants to work on our relationship, that she understands why I'm angry. I haven't responded yet. I don't know if I'm going to. Part of me wants to believe that people can change, but another part of me is tired after 28 years of feeling invisible. My dad, on the other hand, is still the same. My grandmother tells me he's going around saying that I ruined the family, that I'm a traitor, that money changed me. Which is ironic considering he was the one who tried to steal my inheritance. I haven't talked to him since that family gathering, and honestly, I don't have plans to do so anytime soon. Last week, Charlotte sent me a photo of her first day of classes. She was standing in front of a campus building with a new backpack, really smiling, and in the message she put, "Thanks for not letting me stay stuck. I love you, brother." It made me cry. I'm not going to lie. Because all my life I felt like I didn't really have a sister. I just had this person that my parents preferred over me. But now we're starting to get to know each other as real people, without the weight of our parents' expectations and favoritism. My grandmother tells me that my grandfather would be proud of me, not just for fighting for the inheritance, but for using the money responsibly and for helping Charlotte find for her own path. I guess I'll never know for sure if that's true, but I like to think it is. My grandfather always believed in equity, in treating people fairly, in earning things for yourself. Those are values he taught me, and that I've tried to live by all my life. Sometimes I still get angry when I think about it all. About the birthdays that weren't equal, about the play they didn't attend, about the 1,000 times my achievements were minimized while Charlotte's whims were celebrated. But I also realized that those experiences made me who I am. They taught me to be independent, to work hard, not to depend on anyone for my worth or my success. And although I would have preferred to have parents who supported me equitably, I learned that real support can come from other places, like from a grandfather who really saw you, or from a grandmother who fights for you, or from a sister who finally decides to stop playing the role they assigned her. I don't know how all this is going to end. With my parents. Maybe eventually we can have some kind of relationship, maybe not. For now, I'm focused on my life, on my career, on my relationship with Charlotte and with my grandmother, on using this inheritance in a way that honors my grandfather's memory. $500,000 is a lot of money, but the most valuable thing my grandfather left me wasn't the money. It was the validation that I mattered just as much as Charlotte, that I deserved the same as her, that my worth wasn't determined by how much my parents favored me, and that, at the end of the day, is priceless.